One of the students of my courses has written to me to ask me a question. And I've talked a lot about this in some of my blogs as well. I talk about the fact that when you leave an abusive relationship, you have to really take a long, hard look at yourself to understand why it is that you were attracted to the type of person who can be abusive and hurt you in the first place. Now, the reason I do that is because narcissists or abusive people are attracted to the type of person who is more likely to excuse their behavior, to take the blame for their behavior, is more likely to be able to be manipulated and controlled by them. By default, that means somebody who is very low in self-esteem. Because if it was somebody that they met who was very high in self-esteem and high in self-worth, very quickly when the first signs of that abuse start to appear, or even very early on when the warning bells start ringing and the flags are up there that this person is not a very nice person, somebody with a very high sense of self-esteem and self-worth will just walk away and say, no way, that crosses my boundaries. I've got strong boundaries and that behavior is unacceptable. They've crossed the line and walked away. Somebody like me, who was very low in self-esteem, when I saw those red flags and warning bells, I ignored them. Because here was this person who was wonderful and charismatic and telling me everything my insecurities were wanting to hear. That I was the only one for him, that he's never met anyone like me before, and he promised a future of marriage and babies and a long happily ever after. So I then ignored all those warning signs, and he was able to manipulate me. So I say that we have to look at why we're more likely to be in that relationship than somebody else. And we then have to understand that we are low in self-esteem, and we have to understand where that low self-esteem comes from. We're not to blame for that, because the seeds of that are embedded in us very early in childhood. It's somewhere in our childhood our emotional needs are not fully met. So we're left with this inner void of feeling not good enough, that we don't deserve better, that we're not good enough, we don't quite fit in. And therefore, when somebody comes along and sweeps us off our feet, well, then we are easy for them to do that too, and then manipulate and start to control. I hope that makes sense. So this one of my students, she wrote to me, okay, so therefore, if I, in a way, was attracted to that narcissistic type, and if I allowed him, in a way, subliminally, to manipulate me, I can't then shift the feeling that I'm to blame for it. And that's a really, really good question. What she says, how can I then not blame myself for the abuse? And I really can see that. I can see in a way that my argument, in a way, can sound to some people like victim blaming. In the same way that people say, well, if you didn't wear that short skirt, then you wouldn't have been raped by that guy. But I do not believe it is the same. Yes, there is something about us that did attract that type, and we were attracted to them. But I do not for 1 second say that means we're to blame for it. The reason I talk about it is because I would rather, when I was going through my abusive relationship and I was almost murdered by him, I felt helpless. I felt powerless. My self-esteem had been whittled to the point where I couldn't leave if I tried. I didn't know what to do. I felt trapped. Now, that feeling of powerless and feeling like a helpless victim was awful. And when I took that hard look at myself, and I found that, when I asked myself, why am I in this relationship when other women would have left? Why do I keep going back to somebody that I know who hurts me and has been violent towards me when I know that other women wouldn't have? What is it about me? And I found the answer, which was I was very low in self-esteem. My emotional needs weren't met as a child in some way or another. That led to me feeling not good enough, feeling like I didn't deserve better. So when I was in a violent relationship, I thought, well, I was to blame because I didn't deserve better. Now, that knowledge for me was not something I then used to blame myself. I actually found it really liberating, because if there was something about me that in some way had something to do with why I was in this relationship, then that freed me, because that was something I could change. I knew by now that I could not change him. I tried everything in my power. I changed my behavior. If I did this, then he'd be happy. If I did that, maybe I could fix the relationship and we'd be all right. Things would all be happy again. And I knew that none of that worked. So that leads to a level of powerlessness. I knew I couldn't save him, change him, fix the relationship. So that knowledge that there was something amiss with me that I could work on and change was liberating. And that's what I did. I took my focus away from trying to fix him, because I was trying to control the uncontrollable. And I turned that focus back onto me. The one thing I could change, I could work on me. So I really want you to try to separate the two. This is not about blaming you. You are not responsible for his actions or her actions. Everyone is accountable for their own behavior and actions. We're all adults. Nobody is responsible for another person being violent towards them or abusing them. Number one. So you are not to blame. But you can change your life. You can turn it around if you say, okay, this is why I was in that relationship. This is what I need to learn about myself. And this is how I can change it so that I'm never in another abusive relationship again. I never let anybody else hurt me in my life. And the way to do that is to understand your self-esteem was low, and now you've been in that abusive relationship and that cycle of abuse, it's probably even lower, to the point where you've got barely any sense of self-worth left. So now is the time to work on the thing that you can change, which is building your self-esteem, building that self-worth. Because only when you have a healthy sense of self-worth and self-esteem can you set strong boundaries, say no to bad behavior and abuse, say that is not good enough and I will not accept it, I will walk away from that. And only then can you find somebody who will also see you as being worthy and treat you with love and respect. If I feel I'm worthy, then someone else will treat me as worthy. if I am low in self-esteem and I think I don't have any worth at all, well, somebody else will treat me as worthless. People treat you only the way you treat yourself, and you attract, in a way, what you think you deserve. So it's not about blame. All it is saying this is where it comes from, and that knowledge is power, because it gives you the understanding that there is something that you can change. You're not trapped, you're not powerless, you're not helpless. You can change you. So start with you. Work on that self-esteem and that sense of self-worth. Forget about blame. Forget about focusing on that past toxic, negative relationship. All that does is suck your energy, that emotional energy that you need to focus on healing you. So now is the time for you. Now is the time to just move forward, taking one step towards being a survivor and away from being a victim.